Welcome to the Athlete Advisory Podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Athlete Advisory Podcast with Justin Brashear. Justin is an NFLPA certified agent, attorney, and the founder of College Athlete Consulting. With a background as a former Ole Miss catcher and professional player in the Arizona Diamondbacks organization, Justin helps athletes and their families navigate the business side of sports, especially in today's evolving NIL, aka name, image, and likeness landscape. I'm SeanOConnor, and today we're talking about what athletes should really be paying attention to when it comes to NIL deals. All right, Justin, good to see you.
Hey, Sean, thanks. Good to see you too.
Yeah. Hey, let's start off just talking a little bit about your background, right? I know you played for Ole Miss and you're part of the Diamondbacks organization, and then, you became an agent, an attorney. How does that shape the advice that that you're going to give an athlete today?
Oh, sure. So, I think first of all, Sean, having been an athlete, having been in the shoes of the athletes, having gone through what they're going through right now, we talk a lot about, when I came up playing, it was difficult from a physical standpoint to be ready to play, but now it's much more mental. There's so much more activity going on, and so being where they are first is very helpful. The other thing is being a professional and having been around so many different types of people professionally, we deal with other types of personalities, and so we can help to understand the dynamics of what's going on, interpersonally between your teammates in the locker room and the coaching staff and the personnel department and all the different moving parts that you're dealing with in the ecosphere of college athletics.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, the coming up as a college athlete, you're dealing with your teammates and coaching staffs and such, but like what's going on inside the heads of the some of the business people on the other side of the table when those conversations start to happen, I could see it'd be super helpful to have someone in your corner who knows what that's about.
Well, think about it as besides the fact that you're, as an athlete, as a college athlete specifically, you are in sort of a bubble and you're in an environment where everyone's looking at you and expecting things of you. But hey, at the end of the day, you're 18 to 22 years old and you don't know what you don't know. And so if you walk into a meeting room with other people who have done this longer than you have, they're probably going to have some competitive advantage over you from at the negotiating table. And so, we start talking about these things at an earlier age to try to educate and empower that next wave of athletes who are going to ultimately find themselves at that negotiating table.
Yeah, and it's interesting. There's a I don't know if it's an irony, but it's an interesting uh, dynamic as to be a top-notch college athlete. There almost requires a degree of focus and being in somewhat of a controlled environment, a bubble, as you say, right? Which then naturally, you kind of can't be thinking about other things, and then hence the lack of perspective on some of that other stuff. So it's almost just inherent. It's almost inherent to the career path, I guess.
That and they're going to school. A lot of them are living away from home, learning how to
Yeah.
wash clothes for the first time and cook for themselves and, wake up to their own alarm clock, let alone structure a six-figure deal and make sure that your deliverables are accounted for and, timely, performed under the contract.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious. So when an athlete actually receives, a long NIL contract, most people focus on the payout, the Benjamins, like what's the upside here? But there's got to be other things they should be thinking about, right? Like what should they be looking at right away, especially when it comes to things like exclusivity?
That's the first thing I was going to tell you. That's the first thing we look for is exclusivity. We want to know who is in control and who is the owner of the products that are created as a result of the agreement that we enter into. We want to make sure we understand the deliverable schedule. We want to understand the payment schedule. We want to understand the language in there that could potentially create future downfall for our client, such as if you're at a school, for example, that has an agreement with a certain footwear provider, and you're signing an agreement with someone else, you're going to find yourself in a particularly difficult situation to navigate in the future, especially as it gets closer to, March Madness, right? As March Madness is going on right now,
Right.
you see some things pop up. And so we look for that. Obviously, some of the language in the contract is very much written in favor of the school only, and so we have to try to navigate some of that. We have to either soften it or get it excluded in some kind of ways, or even in the circumstances we get some cure periods put in. But the main thing is trying to understand the overall picture of what you're actually agreeing to. And that's difficult sometimes in some of these agreements written with very sophisticated businesses or universities.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, any contract in any, it ends up being like a foreign language almost, right? In terms of uh, what certain things mean. I'm wondering, speaking of language, you're talking about like, deliverables, understanding what the deliverables are. What's an example of deliverables in this context?
Sure, that's a great question. So a lot of times we see agreements that are written. A lot of these agreements that we are negotiating are licensing agreements. They're NIL related. So, for instance, I have a client who is promoting a concert, and he has to make a certain number of social media posts
Mm.
within a certain amount of time. He'll have to make an appearance or two, around the event to promote it and to bring awareness to it. That's one example. Another one would be, we see very commonly is autographs. So you'll have an autograph signing session. You have to have so many, X number of cards signed by this date, and make sure that's done correctly. And what we like to do there as well is when we break that down is we'll build the creative team around it to where we're compounding the time that we're spending. So that way, the ultimate deal here is that the athlete that we represent has to be an athlete. They have to continue to be an elite athlete, or none of this really matters. And so we try to enhance that experience by putting the media around it, building out the posting schedule, and then ultimately that allows them to do their deliverables on time, and then they get paid for it.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, like it's like, oh, there's I'll say the list of deliverables, be it content or personal appearances or actual, signed posters or, cards. But then there's the production that has to happen for that stuff to be of a certain quality. And then that's where obviously you and your team come in, where like, it's one thing to commit to the deliverables. It's another thing to understand, okay, what are the ramifications of actually delivering on that commitment? And if it takes too much time out of the athlete's day, right? Like you said, they can't do what they're ultimately supposed to be doing to make it all, the engine of it.
And the athlete's day is already extremely structured. So if you really, and again, this comes from having been there. So if you're waking up at 7 a.m. to try to get to class, you're going to go to class, you're going to end up in the weight room, you're going to end up on the practice field, you're going to end up in the training facility, in the cold tubs. Then you have study hall. Then you have all these things that take up your day. And when you stop and think about it, it's really like a full-time job. It is a full-time commitment to being there. And so when you add these things in, it can be problematic in some circumstances. And so we really look for that. And again, we try to remember that these young people that are having these opportunities, they're still learning how to be people. They're still learning how to be an adult. And we like to we like to help them understand this opportunity, not just from an economic standpoint, but these are like mini internships. So when you really peel it all back and representing players all the way through an NFL career, if we get a guy to their second contract in the NFL and he plays all the way through and ultimately retires, he's 30 or 32 when that happens. And so the question becomes, what do you do with the rest of your life, and how do we maximize the time and the opportunity in college going through NIL, going through these different interactions with business owners to prepare you for when you're 32? Yeah, you may be sitting on a pile of cash, but if you're an elite athlete that's a highly competitive person, you're not going to sit still very long, very well. And so
Right.
it, instead of opening you up to the potential of squandering your fortune. We want to help you prepare for that life as well. When you're that way, the transition's a lot easier when you're stepping off the field and into the rest of your life.
Yeah, I mean, it's I completely understand what you're saying, and at the same time, right, we're dealing with folks that are in their, late teens, early 20s, and thinking about myself, and I was no elite athlete, but that idea of like having to conceptualize, okay, so you're 35 and like what? Like nobody can really take that in.
I retired from my first career at 25, 26, something like that when I was done playing baseball. And so, a lot of what I do these days is based off of that. I go back and think about my second career as a lawyer and as an agent and as a business owner, and it's been so much better than the first one. Even the first one was great, but it was over at 25, 26. And so
Yeah.
you've got to be ready to make the transition.
Got it. Got it. Let's talk a little more practically, I guess. How can a short-term NIL deal potentially limit future opportunities, right? Because I'm guessing you've got to vet them pretty carefully. What can go wrong there?
You do, and that's a great question. So again, going back to one of the first things we look at is the payment structure and the payment schedule. What we've run into recently, particularly in college football, around the transfer portal, is some of these agreements have a payment schedule structured to where if the player intends to transfer, they're gonna walk away from a lot of money, and or there's gonna be a hefty buyout that's gonna be involved in that process. So, that's one example. Now, if the player, is properly educated on that and understands what goes into that and understands the ramifications around that, it's not necessarily that big of a deal. But the problem is what happens when the player's not educated, when the player's signing something and moving so fast and just chasing a short term, you know, seemingly a gain that could be a setup for something that's a longer term hamstring. And so we want to understand not only the terms of the agreement, but like how it practically plays out, how this is going to impact the player's preparation and performance and the timing. We want to know all those things going into it so that we can prepare the athlete for it when the time comes to perform.
Yeah, that's good stuff. The other thing that occurs to me is that, some of these deals and clauses and contracts are, it's all pretty new in terms of, the overarching world of sports, culture generally, right? In terms of, I mean, TikTok didn't exist, 10 years ago, that kind of a thing. And so, now again, most of the younger athletes are, digital natives, but even so, a lot of the organizations, the colleges, et cetera, are themselves figuring out how the heck and what the ramifications are
Absolutely.
of these sorts of assets, deliverables, long term, short term, that kind of a thing.
But NIL in and of itself is still in kindergarten.
Yeah.
It's not even, it hasn't been 5 years since NIL has been legalized.
Hmm.
And so it's still an evolving process. The transfer portal, the college football calendar has changed 3 times in the last 3 years. The NFL's calendar is what it is, and it's published ahead of time, and you know what's gonna
Yeah.
be. You don't get that in college sports. And so that becomes an issue. The other thing is every school is negotiating a licensing agreement, and so you're essentially contracting with, in most cases, the largest entity in the state, the economic driver of pick your state. If it's Texas, if it's South Carolina, if it's Tennessee, you're dealing with a major player in their
Yeah.
economy. So the contracts are very rigid. You're dealing with very sophisticated people when you're negotiating these deals. It's going from a CFO who's probably 20-year tenured MBA professor, economist, some type of person with those kinds of credentials, and you're dealing with general counsel of a state institution. And so the contracts, if you can imagine, are pretty rigid. And you
Yeah.
have to understand, and they're all individual. Every state, every school, everybody's going to be different. And so it's very important that you take time to understand what that is. And I tell you this, Sean, I think the biggest issue when it comes to that short-term chase of NIL is people want to move too fast. People want to go and they're so hungry for the first deal, they chase it, and they end up putting themselves in a potentially disadvantaged situation.
Yeah.
If you do the thing that you're supposed to do, if you play the game the right way, if you're a model citizen in the classroom, if you treat the janitor the same way you treat the CEO, the deals come to you. And the deals that come to you and they sustain that time and that space, those are the deals you want to chase anyway. The ones that are fleeting, the ones that are quick and they rely on that speed, those are red flags for me. So, if nothing else, we try to slow things down a little bit and make sure that we get as much information as we can before making that decision that's ultimately going to impact the rest of your life.
Wow. Yeah, that's I hear, and I don't mean this as a judgment, but I hear ego in it. You know what I mean? Where it's just like, I'm a young guy. I've got this opportunity. I've been gifted with this, with this athletic prowess. I'm in this amazing program, and people want to give me money, to do what I love doing. And there's a certain, I want to sign the deal because it further legitimizes my status, right? Which, isn't a bad thing. I mean, we all want to be LeBron James or whatever, but, I think LeBron's past some of that. But listen, I don't need to blab on here. We are up against time. I want to ask you to leave us with one thing, and then we'll talk again. I know, Justin, but how can athletes use the NIL opportunities not just to earn income in the short term, right, but to build real business experience that helps them long term? Is there a couple of quick points you could make here?
Great. That's a great point, and that's something that we bring up often. When you start out, and I say this from the standpoint of being a lawyer, when you start out as an associate attorney, you're not going to go to the lunch meetings, you're not going to interface with the clients, you're not going to be in partners meetings and those kinds of high-level conversations. When you're being recruited by the firm, or when you're in a situation like an athlete working in NIL, you're going to have exposure to different things. The owner of the business or the CEO is going to want to bring the quarterback with him to the meeting to, if for lack of better words, show him off, right? But that's exposure that the athlete gets that they don't realize they're getting at that time. That's access to rooms and conversations that are way above their pay grade at the moment in life, at the circumstance in life they're in. And so if nothing else, use NIL to open those doors to the future opportunities. Use NIL to get a seat at that table and get the opportunity to talk to the people that are decision makers about your future. That's what NIL can do for people. It doesn't always have to be the big flashy 7-figure deal. It doesn't have to be the shoe deal. It could be the local coffee shop that you learn how to run a business that's going to impact the rest of your life. And that's really, we love to lean into that, Sean. We love to help our athletes work in that space. We love to work with businesses that are looking for some creative way to do that and expand their market. So I appreciate that. I appreciate that question.
Yeah, it just helped me connect the dot where earlier you compared the NIL landscape or dynamic to that of being an internship, right? And so what you just said solidified that for me, which is now as a young guy with an NIL with, whatever company, I'm attending meetings and having conversations that I wouldn't otherwise be exposed to that are only going to help me over the years to get smarter, better, quicker, faster, from a long-term perspective. And, ultimately too makes them a better client. We got to go. We're out of time, but great to talk to you.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks for having me today.
All right. That's it for today's episode of the Athlete Advisory Podcast. If you or your family are navigating NIL decisions and want clear, practical advice, visit collegeathleteconsulting.com to learn more. And don't forget to like, subscribe, or leave a review if you found this episode helpful, or forward a link to someone you know that would benefit from it. I'm SeanOConnor. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.